Welcome to the Beyond the Medallion podcast, where we interview U.S. presidential scholars to hear about their unique and compelling journeys through life after receiving the medallion. I'm Thomas Wills II, a computer engineering bachelor's and master's student at the Rochester Institute of Technology. I also serve as a communications manager for the U.S. Presidential Scholars Foundation. My guest today is international artist Kevin Berlin. 1983 U.S. Presidential Scholar in the Arts, Kevin received his presidential medallion at the White House from President Reagan. A graduate of Yale University, he went on to study at the Slade School of Fine Art and has built a renowned global career spanning painting, sculpture, and performance.
Buongiorno. Hello from Italy. I was
Hi.
I've got a real Italian tomato here just for authenticity.
Yeah, it looks delicious.
Yeah, no, Italy's famous for tomatoes for a reason. It's-
Yeah, so as I mentioned, you were named a U.S. Presidential Scholar in the Arts back in 1983. So, what do you remember most about receiving your medallion from President Reagan at the White House?
well, the first big shock is you're saying President Reagan, and that seems like light years away, an infinity away. I think it was my first experience where I felt not just like I was from Maryland, but kind of like I was from the whole United States. I met scholars in kind of every different field, people who are doing rocket science and writing books and doing all these incredible things. And we all ended up together for about a week. And it was very emotional going to the White House and hearing the military bands. And I don't know, we had this sense that we were maybe a part of history. I think the biggest thing was it was just a really giant pat on the back, like a very big confidence booster, if you like. And I think it helped in a certain way moving forward.
Yeah, yeah, you guys had a whole week out there for the National Recognition Program, right?
Yeah, it used to be a week and then some. There were also special events. They brought us to uh, some really unique military locations. They brought us to the Constitution Hall. And then a lot of interactive events. It was really a bit overwhelming.
Yeah, I can imagine at that age, it's quite a bit to take in.
Well, it was kind of like life just started now, and everything else was just kind of a warm up.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Um, yeah, so after that, as you studied at Yale and then the Slade School of Fine Art, after that you built honestly a pretty incredible global career. So when it comes not only to career, but how you kind of went back to the Presidential Scholars and the foundation, how did you first get involved with the Presidential Scholars Foundation on the alumni side?
Well, a few years after I moved to New York City, which seemed like the right place to go as an ambitious painter and sculptor. And the foundation had a competition to design an award. It was the Jimmy Carter Award and the Lyndon Baines Johnson Award for individual achievement and a greater achievement for the Presidential Scholars Foundation. And for the competition, I thought I would design an eagle feather in an inkwell because
Ooh.
everything started, in the beginning there was the word, the pen, and my only challenge was finding an eagle feather. But luckily, I was very familiar with the Natural History Museum in New York City. And for some reason back then, you could kind of do anything. They have a lot of rules these days, but back then, I actually dragged a shoebox full of clay and wires, and I sat down in front of an exhibit with an actual bald eagle, and I sculpted the feather on the spot, dragged it back in the subway, and eventually they selected the award, cast it in bronze, and invited me to join the foundation, which I stayed with for, I think, probably 7 or 8 years.
Wow, that's an amazing story.
It was really great being on the foundation for one simple reason, besides that I felt like I was, I mean, it's kind of obvious, but giving something back, doing something because I felt like the foundation really did a lot for me. But I met people like Sandy Nimitz and James Farmer, who was the vice president of General Motors at the time. And Jim Farmer became kind of a mentor in a way. He told me a lot of really, really smart things without trying. So we sat in on these meetings and we traveled a little bit and went to some events. And I remember once he was late for an event because there was a strike, which was totally unknown to everybody. And I said, "Oh, I'm sorry you were late." And he said, "Oh, it's fine." He said, "I don't worry about things that were not my fault. I worry about the things that are my fault, like giving a good speech when I show up today." And it reminds me here living in not far from Rome, the Emperor Marcus Aurelius used to study, I guess they called them the Stoics. And one of the ideas was you're supposed to worry about the things that you can control, not the things that are out of your control. And here was Jim Farmer just handing out that wisdom without even realizing it.
Oh, yeah, that's amazing. I definitely try and take that advice to heart as often as I can because it's very easy to just get swept up in the things you don't have control over, I feel like.
That makes a lot of sense. And it's surprising how if you're around, and that's something when you're around presidential scholars, and it's something I was going to mention. Sometimes when I have my biggest struggles in life, whether it's a family or self-image or work, or, we all have these things in common, I kind of, wait a minute, I was a presidential scholar, and I sit up a little taller and I, put my hat a little higher, and I think, what would a presidential scholar do? Would they be sitting here crying or feeling sorry for themselves? No. And then I kind of perk up and move forward. So that's something I kept in the back of the mind. I think if you're around successful people, then you tend to be more successful yourself. And I've always had a theory throughout my artwork that I've carried with me, and the idea is if you surround yourself with geniuses, that's almost the same as being a genius yourself.
Yeah, it's the people around you kind of build yourself up in the process. There's so many lessons to learn, right?
Absolutely, because we're not alone. You need some. You need some support and even a lot of support. And, anybody who does anything successful, they had a lot of support, but sometimes you have to kind of build that support around you, even if you don't realize you're doing it. It's really important to have the voices that you can listen to. I follow heavyweight boxing a fair amount, and there's always a coach and a cornerman, during a fight. You're not just in that ring alone, dodging punches.
Yeah. All right. So in 2003, you moved to Russia to paint classical ballerinas, which ended up becoming your introduction to the world of ballet. What was it like working behind the scenes with the Mariinsky Ballet?
Well, that was a very surprising moment because I really knew nothing about ballet at all and had never planned to ever paint a ballet dancer, though I have painted dancers before. Um, well, one morning I had just moved to Italy, and it was in 2003, and I was reading the English-speaking newspaper because I knew no Italian, and it said 300th anniversary of St. Petersburg. And I thought, well, what is that? And as it turned out that Tchaikovsky wrote Sleeping Beauty, Swan Lake, and The Nutcracker for this particular theater, and it was performed first at the Mariinsky Theater in St. Petersburg. So basically, I woke up one morning and decided to move to Russia and paint ballerinas.
Wow.
And it took about 3 months to actually be accepted because you need permission from the director of the theater. And you get your pass renewed once a week. And I think the only reason I was able to stay for so long because I spent more than 9 months there. I was probably
Wow.
there more time than any foreigner since the revolution. That's actually possible. Um, but I was kind of like a baby crossing the highway. I didn't know what was coming to hit me. And the thing that saved me was that I had nothing to offer. Because usually when people visit the theater, they have some kind of a political agenda or they're offering a lot of money, they're trying to achieve some project. And I just wanted to make artwork. And at the time, the director of the theater, he somehow got it. He figured that out that this guy actually does want to make artwork. And he let me stay. And so for me, it was a chance to work with not only so many ballet artists, but to get really an introduction to the discipline of ballet. And it overlaps a lot with my work up till that time because ballerinas are really Olympic level athletes, but they have beautiful and handsome faces, and they have to express themselves. They have to project. from a great distance emotion. And my work has always been about telling stories. That's why I like being in Florence, Italy, because, the great narrative painters, narrative storyteller painters, and sculptors were, Michelangelo and Giambologna and Raphael, all of my heroes are here. And the ballerinas have an extraordinary amount of discipline, and they end up telling their stories. And it's a great format or a sort of a platform to talk about things that we all have in common.
Wow. Yeah, well, it sounds like the baby crossing the highway was definitely worth it.
Yeah, I'm still here but here to tell the tale, I guess. So.
So more into your art career. You've mentioned before that a major part of your artistic philosophy is traveling to unique locations to find inspiration. So on that note, why is working directly from life so vital to your creative process?
Well, I guess the simplest answer is that, like anybody, if you're a writer, if you're a painter, if you're in computer science at a very high level, or even mathematics, you feel you have something to say, but it's important for people who are even more expert than you are to understand what you're saying, but also people who are totally unfamiliar. You're trying to communicate with everybody. And so you kind of need to know what you're talking about. When I moved to Montana and I was getting roping and riding lessons and hanging out at the livestock auctions, when I first learned to sculpt a buffalo, I didn't know that the front legs of a buffalo are actually halfway in their body. If their body's this long, their front leg is actually right in the middle.
Oh,
And
wow.
who would know that? But you don't want someone who knows their buffaloes to look at your sculpture and instead of feeling the story, think, "Oh, the leg is broken, isn't it?" You don't want them thinking about the wrong thing. So you kind of have to make yourself an expert. And the other thing that happens is you get very creative when you have a lot of information, when you really soak in the atmosphere of a place, whether it's Montana or if it's Los Angeles or I was working in Los Angeles, the California girls, bodybuilders and movie stars was the theme. Or, if you're in Bali working with, endangered monkeys, you wanna, you wanna really live it and breathe it. And then you're kind of in the end painting from memory. For example, when Leonardo da Vinci died, they say that the Mona Lisa was still in his bedroom, which is perhaps the reason it's in France today, because he was in France at the time. And
Wow.
he never finished it. He just kept working on it, apparently, because he kept having something more to say or something more to know. And I think it's ongoing. I think the more you know about something, the more you can talk about it in simple terms. Like if you're a musician and you know all the notes, you can, throw them up in the air like a deck of cards and see how they land.
Yeah, it's almost the way I like to think about it is almost like the difference between expertise and mastery, because I feel like as an expert, you can really dive deep into things, but it takes mastery to be able to break that down into like digestible chunks for people unfamiliar, right?
I think that's really close to a thought that I often have. I often think if you're working on a painting, even if you're just painting a portrait of someone this big and they're sitting in front of you, it's kind of like Olympic diving. Like you've trained for this dive your whole life. You've had it coaching, you've done it, you've actually made it 3 or 4 times. Sometimes you miss it, but here you're in front of a billion people and you're jumping off. But as soon as you're off that diving board, you don't think about anything because you've been training for this your whole life, and you're just at some point you're going to hit the water. And if you don't make a splash, your coach is going to be proud of you, and you're going to just won the Olympic medal. If you do, well, get another piece of paper. You know, you'll
Yeah.
you know, there's you got wait 4 years and try again.
Yeah, so you had mentioned the endangered animals just a little bit ago. This philosophy of locations inspiring artwork that's led to you going to Cambodia, Sri Lanka, and even Indonesia to create art aimed at saving endangered animals. So, what is the connection for you between fine art and wildlife conservation?
Well, I think we all want to do something at some point that's not about us. And I think I remember being on the foundation, we talked about presidential scholars, and one of the things that the committees looked for in general was somebody who's not just thinking about them, but they're looking outward and seeing, we got a big world out there, and there's a lot of areas where people and places and things need assistance. You always hear about some uh, some of these very wealthy people talking about going to Mars, but well, there's no oxygen there, or very, very little.
Yeah.
There's nothing to eat. And we have a planet right here. So my thought was, what if we just do a really good job, taking care of this planet? We don't have to go to Saturn or something. Um, and so I guess uh, I decided about 2 years ago, I decided to cancel everything and move to Indonesia. So I moved to Bali and I got a studio at the edge of the jungle.
Ooh.
And I worked with endangered animals. I spent some time in Cambodia, um, working with Fauna and Flora, which is an organization started at Cambridge University, which Sir
Oh.
Richard Attenborough was very involved with. Um, and they're basically trying to protect endangered animals all over the world. And they gave me access to their Siamese crocodile breeding center. Now, a
Ooh.
Siamese crocodile is a medium to large size crocodile as they go, and they were considered extinct in the wild. And then about 15 years ago, a group accidentally found some in a very remote area, and they decided, well, let's see if we can't get some of these crocodiles back into nature. Because, of course, crocodiles are farmed. There are thousands of farms over East Asia, and they're basically killed and used to make accessories and fashion, make leather bags and things like that. And so they set up a center where they would breed these crocodiles. When they get big enough, when the babies they collect the eggs so they don't get damaged. When they're big enough, they would put the crocodiles back into a wild area, and they would work with the community in that area to help protect it and come up with some advantages for people living in the area to let the crocodiles stay rather than trying to sell them back to somewhere.
Yeah.
And the program's been very successful. I didn't tell my mother about this because it's really not good to be around crocodiles in general. I, I've had the experience before. I don't know if you've ever been looking at a crocodile and the crocodile is looking at you and you're trying to paint the crocodile. And at some point you like enter into this dinosaur era brain and you realize that crocodile is being patient. It's still, but it thinks you're lunch. That crocodile wants to eat you. He's looking
Yeah.
all calm, and he wants to eat you. And if you've ever painted something that wants to eat you, it's an extraordinary experience. But that's the kind of thing I mentioned earlier, that going to the place, becoming an expert, to have the sensation that your lunch is very rewarding in terms of when you actually do make the paintings, that you'll maybe have some more insight or something to say. Some of the finished paintings, there was a painting called Elephant in the Room, which basically is that age-old story. If you've got an elephant in your living room, that's maybe not good during your party, or a crocodile in the house, also not good. Um,
I think I'd prefer the elephant.
yeah, so I kind of painted these scenes of the people I know at a party in a living room, a room like this, but there would be an elephant or a crocodile there. And even if you're 5 or 3 years old, you would know, should you have a crocodile in your living room? No. So you're kind of telling a story without telling it. And I think that's something really critical. You don't want to uh, create what do they call it? I forget the word, a polemic. You don't want to tell people what's right or wrong or good or bad, but I find if you want to communicate with people, it's just best to try and start a conversation. Just say, I'm thinking this, what do you think? And just go there, because when you tell people what's right and wrong or good or bad, they tend to stop listening to you. But if you just start a conversation, you're already halfway there, and perhaps one person will think more about you know should they have a crocodile bag in their house, or should they have a crocodile belt on their waist.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like that philosophy of trying to have something a little, I don't know if obvious is the right word, but something more straightforward in the painting while also having deeper resonance through that experience that you get.
Yeah, and sometimes I find that a little bit of people call it humor, but it's really just if you read Freud's book on jokes, if you take a joke apart, it's not even funny, according to Freud. The pieces don't add up. But sometimes communicating with people in an indirect way is more powerful than kind of overwhelming them. Kind of sneak up on the idea a little bit. Um, so, so I try and do that in the paintings. And of course, a painting is different than any other medium, and it's in the same with the sculpture, in that a painting doesn't move. If we're watching a video, even right now, even if you watch a podcast, you can see something
Yeah.
going on. If you listen to a song, it changes just moment to moment. So a painting is going to be the same now as it is in 200 years. The sculpture is going to be the same. So you have to communicate without movement. And there's a different way of doing that. And one of the ways to do it is to combine different moments in time.
Hmm.
Um, for example, if you're sitting in New York and you're thinking of tomatoes, and I'm sitting here and I'm thinking of my grandmother, and I painted us right now, I would paint you, my grandmother, and some tomatoes and New York because it combines both what you're actually seeing, but also what we're thinking and feeling. It's very
Hmm.
easy to do it in a movie or a book. So painting is kind of a very old-fashioned language is used to communicate.
Wow, yeah, I've never thought about it that way. That's really intriguing. Just the whole thing of it's there and it's staying like that for potentially hundreds of years, right?
Well, a lot of these strategies have been explored before. I think they did it really well in the Renaissance. They were most of the patrons were sponsoring Bible stories, and you had to tell if you have a scene of a Mary and a baby or a crucifixion, you had to communicate with people who can't read because most of people in even in the Renaissance time and medieval period before, they just barely invented the printing press
Yeah.
and people weren't reading. So the question is, how can you have someone walk into the church when they're 3 and then walk in again when they're 20 and walk in again when they're a great grandparent and see the same scene, but keep getting something out of it? And
Hmm.
so they found ways to communicate, the passion of this figure or the pain of that figure or the ecstasy of this other figure in a way that's not fixed, but it's there. It's very complex in a lot of ways, very simple, and that's why it really helps to study history. I happen to be taking a few courses right now here in Florence on medieval history, and I find sometimes it's better to learn something old. People spend so much time looking to learn something new, but sometimes I just really want to learn something old.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that. I got quite a bit into Leonardo da Vinci a couple years ago, so I definitely feel where you're coming from there.
Oh yeah, he was excited to understand why the sky was blue. I mean, it's just most people I know, they look at the sky and then they go, what's the weather like? They don't wonder how did it get blue.
Yeah.
And part of that idea is just a simple idea of being curious, being a little kid. And that's probably the secret to how you paint a good tomato. Like I talk about tomatoes, I've had shows of tomatoes, all different kind of tomatoes. But if you paint a tomato, if you paint a nude, like the birth of Venus, in order to do it well, you pretty much do the same thing every time. All you need to do is look at that tomato and imagine you've never seen a tomato before. You've never seen one time. And you'll just be like, oh my God, that tomato, it's a miracle. You're like Columbus, and this tomato is a new world. Um, and if you look at it fresh like that, then you're gonna interpret it at least not in a cliche way. You have a better chance of saying something special about what's right in front of you. And that's especially true if you're painting something as complex as a human figure or even a classical dancer or a ballerina, for example.
Wow. Yeah. I'll have
I'm a
to
little overexcited about tomatoes, so you have to forgive me.
well, I
That's
mean,
like,
you're in Italy and you're
yeah.
taking it all in, so I get it. So You've been on quite a few expeditions over the years, but not every expedition goes exactly as planned. You once traveled to Ukraine with the hope of helping to save wild tigers. So what happened on that trip?
Well, and originally I was invited after going to Russia, I was invited to Ukraine to work with the National Opera and Ballet. And in
Oh,
Kiev, which is in the news a lot these days for tragic reasons, is one of the best ballets in the world, period. And so I went backstage and spent time there, but I was also very interested in the circus because in that part of the world, the circus is like the ballet. It has a tremendous history. And I thought, well, I'm going to save the tigers. And how can I save the tigers? I got to get near tigers. Well, if you go into the most difficult regions to reach in, in Indonesia or in India, wherever you're going, you're not going to see a tiger. A tiger, they stay away from people, especially now because there's less than 3,500 tigers globally, and the
wow.
biggest population is only about 400 worldwide. So I thought, well, this is easy. I'll just go to the circus and I can hang out with tigers all day long. This is something else I didn't tell my mother about, because you don't want to know that your kid is near tigers. Because I don't know if you've ever been near a tiger, but they are very, they're, I don't know, 200 kilos, 400 plus pounds. And it's a very, very powerful animal. And when I first went, I thought I would get the right shoes so I could run away from a tiger, should one escape. Um, and of course, you can't outrun a tiger, even sort of. The only real safety if a tiger ever does escape is hide behind the tiger trainer. And because they'll at least be nervous about the tiger trainer, and they've also known him their whole life. So you might give you an extra escape moment. Um, but aside from the fact I did a show, it's called Tiger Training for Beginners. I showed it at a gallery in London. I traveled it to New York, and it was also in Miami. I don't think I saved one tiger. It's so hard to save tigers. They live in all these different countries that have so many difficulties and political, serious, serious economic problems. Uh, and so sometimes no matter how much you try, you're just not going to do very well. And then, of course, some people said, well, what were you doing at the circus? And of course, I was there because it was a chance to be near tigers. And it didn't occur to me that, of course, that art, like bullfighting and like a lot of other arts that involve animals, they're part of a traditional culture, but they're not part of our modern world. Our modern world now has, Cirque du Soleil. It doesn't have the same kind of culture sort of all over. So there were all kinds of reasons that I don't think I saved any tigers. Um, so that's one of the reasons when I went to Sri Lanka recently, I wanted to work with Asian elephants because you actually can help Asian elephants. There are a lot of places where you can give donations, and there are a lot of protective areas. I was in a park in Sri Lanka called Utalawa National Park, not easy to pronounce. I practiced. Um, and they have programs for orphaned elephants because a lot of them, because of poachers, lose their parents and then they don't have a family structure to grow up and they actually rewild them. And a lot of these programs, you could make a donation and you could actually help the life of an elephant. There was one elephant who lost part of his leg in a trap, and they actually created an artificial leg for that elephant and took care of him. So you can help elephants, and you can also help Siamese crocodiles if you go to Fauna and Flora, which is based in UK. They have a lot of programs for other animals. So I'm not saying don't help tigers. I'm just saying uh, it's some other animals have a better chance if we stay focused.
Huh. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I might consider making a donation to an elephant because
There we go.
they're such fascinating creatures. I mean, it's nice to hear that there's so much work being put into their
Well,
conservation.
I remember when I studied at the Slade School in London, this was a long time back. I actually studied zoology a little bit along with my art classes. And I went to a conference on large African mammals, which there just happened to be one. And there's a guy named Sir Ian Hamilton, who was one of the world's experts. And he showed a chart, which I'll never forget. He did a slideshow. He showed a chart, and it was basically a map. And it was, this is where elephants live. This is where people live 100 years ago. And there's a lot of these areas that were elephant and the small areas where there were people. And then he said, this is today. And it was almost reversed. There was hardly any places for elephants, and there was a ton of places with people. And that's ultimately what they call habitat loss is really one of the big challenges for these animals because elephant needs a lot of food and a lot of space.
Yeah.
And wherever people are, elephants aren't. Wherever elephants are, people aren't. And then oftentimes there's a lot of conflict where they meet because if an elephant shows up in your garden, which was a problem in Sri Lanka, one elephant is going to eat your whole village's food for a month in a day.
Yeah, and what they don't eat, they
So
might just stomp on, right?
and the
So,
same if a tiger shows up near your
oof.
kids, because they're out of their area, you're going to have conflicts, and so there's a lot to manage the moments where there is an interaction, and the big question: how can you save some area for these animals where they can just be themselves?
Yeah, I feel like it's definitely a complicated problem, that's for sure.
Yeah, and it's different, and every country has a different, different limitations, and then these animals are very different also. But I would say a statistic I heard recently: 80% of the large mammals in Africa are gone since 1980.
Wow.
80% don't exist anymore. So there's a lot of I hate to use the word mass extinction, but I think there's a lot of zoologists discuss it in those simple terms.
Wow.
Easier to save tomatoes. That's what I'm joking, but anyway, um,
Yeah, that's great. So, as you've mentioned some here, apart from painting animals, you've also spent time painting everyday subjects, ranging from tomatoes in Southampton to irises in Florence. So, how do you find the extraordinary in something as ordinary as a tomato?
well, I think it's a little bit like I said, that idea of looking at it like you've never seen it before. Um, I think also, and you'll find that with anything, I know you're involved in computer science. I don't know to which specific, but the more you know about it, the more intriguing it gets, I'm guessing.
Yes.
The more you like, for example, I've heard this a long time ago that if you ask someone who knows a little bit about physics, um, and you ask, what do we know? They say, oh, we know this, and we know this Bernoulli's equation, and we know this. But if you ask someone like Einstein when he was alive, he said, we don't know anything. We just don't know anything. And I think that once you really gain a lot of the kind of knowledge that you can acquire, you'll start to recognize what we don't know, and then it gets really interesting. And so I think, no matter how many, recently I've been painting irises here they have one of the most beautiful iris gardens in the world in Florence. And they have a society that has a competition since 1955 and there are actually a lot of winners from the States and UK,
Oh,
especially, creating hybrid irises. And they have about, I think, several thousand irises in this garden. And I've been painting for about a month. They spent 11 months to have 1 month of irises because irises only last about a month. It's a very short season.
wow.
Uh, and so even as you're painting them, they're starting to die. They're opening and dying in front of you. And so you have to paint a lot of irises to get just a little bit of understanding of them. Um, and part of that is just being persistent. And I think that's true in almost every field. If you talk to a prima ballerina, a ballerina who's 40 and has been in a performance of every famous ballet you could think of, she's still practicing her pirouettes. I mean, she's doing pirouettes every day, but she's been doing pirouettes her whole life. She still has to practice them. And I think if you want to be good at something, you got to do your homework over and over and over again. And I know they use the word busy work, but it's not really busy work. It's really, it's essential. If you're painting a figure, if you're painting the nude, you have to, it's like being an Olympic athlete, I don't care how good your trainer is, how much talent you have, if you don't, run every day, and eat the right foods, you're not going to beat the other guy because, he is.
Yeah, I feel like especially as well, you were saying it's not really busy work. I agree, especially if it's something you're passionate about. It's not busy work, it's just something you enjoy doing.
Yeah, and I think that's if I had to give some advice, which I'm not sure if I'm qualified, but I guess everyone's qualified to give some advice. And I always think that this talk, when we were originally talking about doing a podcast, we thought about this idea of how would this apply to artists who are presidential scholars. And I think anything an artist does or any things I do is going to apply to just anybody in any field. I know when I start a project, suppose I was just going to paint your portrait sitting in a chair, like the Mona Lisa with a little bit of a smile. Um, I would aim for one thing every time. Every time I search for what I call capo lavoro. Capo in Italian means boss, uh, you know, chief, boss, and lavoro means work. It's like a boss work. And it
Oh,
literally is a translation for the word we use in English, masterpiece. A capo lavoro is a masterpiece. And every time I try and do anything, even if it's a small sketch, even if it's making a plate of spaghetti at home, I try and make a masterpiece. I don't know if I'll succeed, but at least I'm aiming for that. And I think that's something that a lot of the people who became presidential scholars started doing early was trying to do something great, even if they didn't succeed. They aimed for capo lavoro.
yeah, I definitely agree from my time I've had so far with the alumni that, r shooting for the stars, as some people say, is definitely a trend amongst the presidential scholars.
Yeah, I wanted to thank you and whoever has been involved in expanding the foundation and reaching out to people, because one of the things I found exciting about being involved even in a podcast is a chance, even though I'm far away, I don't feel so far away. And it's a chance to reach out and make some connections with some people I don't know and hopefully reconnect with a couple people I do. And I've just found that the connections and the moments I've spent with the Presidential Scholars Group and the foundation, the whole experience has been enormously rewarding in ways I can't even it's kind of not really measurable, and I just find it personally really rewarding. So I want to say thank you for reaching out, not just to me, but anybody out there.
Yeah, of course. And thank you so much for answering the call that we sent out.
Thank you. Yeah, and you'll find if you ask any artist, like some people come up to me and say, "Oh, you just finished this project. You must be so happy." And I go, "Sono tormentato." And they're like, "Tormentato, what does that mean?" And apparently that's the word Michelangelo always used because he was always tormented. And I'm not saying you have to walk around and like Van Gogh and want to cut off your ear or anything, but
Ooh.
if you talk to almost anybody who's doing any of the arts, they will always, and probably what you're doing also, you're always tormented because you always want to have done it better and you want the next one to be better. And you're really thinking about how am I going to make the next one? You're never just satisfied and, oh, now I'm happy. There's moments of joy, but you always are aiming for that, that new thing that's going to really be something great.
Yeah. Yeah, so on that note, when you look back at your journey, how would you say your perspective of success has changed since 1983?
I think the thing that hasn't changed is I still feel like I'm about 5 or 6 years old, and and maybe I behave that way sometimes. I don't know, but I think the key is to never acknowledge that you've accomplished anything. The key is to be focused on what you're doing at the moment and what you can do with what you got today. So I try not to focus. Back to heavyweight boxing. Eventually, after ballerinas, I want to work with. I do a series about boxers. Um,
Ooh.
but but at some point, if you ask a boxer, "What about your next fight?" and they're about to do a championship fight, I don't think about it because you can't think about the next fight because you got to win the one that's right in front of you because that guy wants to knock you out and take what you got. So
Got to
I
make it
guess
to the
it's
next fight.
yeah, yeah. It's kind of an idea which I went to a lot of Buddhist monuments when I was traveling in Cambodia,
Mm,
especially, and also a little bit in Java, and they talk a lot about that idea of being in the present, of being the present. A present is a gift. There's this kind of idea there's an enormous value in just being here right now. And sometimes if we had a glass of wine and we were, which is typical in Italy, people are always having a glass of wine in the early evening, and you had a toast, often I'd make the same toast. It would be to being here now.
wow, I
Because
like that.
just being here now is really a lot. And I think it's hard to get very far if you don't have some gratitude and some focus on what's right in front of you. Not easy to do, but if you can, even every once in a while, I think you'll have a more, things will be a little richer. You'll be a little more glad that you woke up in the morning.
Yeah, I'm really gonna try and internalize that because yeah, I totally agree. Just being in the present moment can be so powerful. You really kind of see things for what they are.
Yeah, and then you can build on it because you see what you got to work with.
Yeah, exactly.
I want presidential scholars to grow and like get Arts Week back and just get bigger and reach more people and have more benefits. And I think the fact that it's so inclusive and that it's about that idea which I had mentioned of people thinking about something beyond themselves,
Yeah.
that if more people did that, we'd have a better place, period. I mean,
Yeah, we
across the
really
planet,
would.
without anybody doing, without anybody canceling what they're already doing. It just means just, doing, I think that would make those two concepts, I think, are very presidential scholar concepts. And I think they're, they're noble in the sense that, I mean, people have different philosophies about how to improve the world or if you should even bother. Um, but I think you can at least improve the world in your spare time. It's like, that it's better to aim for that. And I think that was always one of the goals of the presidential scholars was about encouraging excellence. How
Yeah.
do you be excellent? All the stuff we talked about, work harder, be in the present, stay focused, make an effort, all that kind of, um, learn everything you can so you can see what you don't know and then aim for that. These are all things which are, they're really, they're part of the idea behind presidential scholars. I don't know if it was Kennedy or it was Carter that talked about this idea of encouraging excellence. Is that still something that the foundation talks about a little bit, or?
Yeah, I definitely say so. I'd say the biggest parts, the biggest things that the foundation talks about is just connecting with each other and like using everyone's varied perspectives to like just expand how you see the world. Like that's a really powerful part of the scholars. Um,
Mhm.
and then also really striving for like that greatness and contributing to something like greater than yourself, leaving the world better than it was when you got there, you know?
I'll give the two thumbs up for that. And I'll say thank you to you, and I'll say thank you to anybody who joined in and anybody who is excited about the presidential scholars. Thank you, and I hope everybody will keep having a chance to reach out to each other. And ciao from Italy.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here today. And thank you so much, listeners, for listening to this episode of the podcast. Tune in next month for another Presidential Scholar story.